There are moments in life that feel completely ordinary, moments that pass without meaning, without pause, without any sign that they will ever become important, and yet sometimes everything changes without warning, and what once felt distant suddenly becomes real in a way that cannot be ignored, because there are people who have stood at the edge between life and death, people who crossed into something beyond this world and then returned, but they never return the same because when a person experiences a reality beyond what they once believed was final, it reshapes how they see everything that came before it. At first, it begins like any other day, nothing unusual, nothing alarming, just a normal routine moving forward without interruption, until something shifts, something small, something easy to dismiss, a strange feeling in the body, a moment of weakness, a quiet signal that something is not right, but still not enough to stop, not enough to fully understand what is coming because like most people, he believed there would always be more time, more chances to think, more opportunities to reflect. Later, until that later disappears in a way he never expected. Then the moment comes, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, almost unnoticed as the connection to the world begins to fade, voices grow distant, movement slows, and the awareness of the physical body begins to weaken, until there is a separation, a transition from being fully present to something else, something unfamiliar, something that cannot be explained through the rules of the world he once understood. In that moment, everything that once felt important begins to lose its weight, the worries, the plans, the things he chased, the things he feared, all of it suddenly feels distant and insignificant, because none of it follows into what comes next, and this realization does not come as a thought, but as a clear understanding that settles instantly, without confusion and without doubt. Something unexpected follows because instead of fear there is calm, a stillness that replaces panic, a quiet awareness that this is not the end, but the beginning of something else, something more real than anything he has experienced before, and this calm does not remove the seriousness of the moment, it makes it clearer, sharper, more undeniable. As this awareness grows, the reality around him begins to change, not in a physical way but in a way that is deeply felt, a presence that cannot be seen with the eyes, yet is understood with certainty because this is not emptiness, it is not nothingness, it is a continuation, a phase where what was hidden during life begins to reveal itself without distraction. In this state, time no longer feels the same, moments stretch, awareness deepens, and everything that once felt scattered begins to come together because what appears is not random, it is connected, shaped by what was lived, by what was chosen, by what was carried within, and this is where the understanding begins to settle in a way that cannot be ignored. Memories begin to surface, not as distant thoughts, but as clear reflections, actions, decisions, moments that once seemed small now carrying weight, because in this place nothing is insignificant, nothing is lost, everything remains in a way that shows its true impact, and this is where the difference between what was known and what was lived becomes clear. This clarity does not come with confusion, it comes with certainty because there is no distraction left, no noise, no way to avoid what is being revealed, only a direct experience of truth, and this truth is not something that can be changed in that moment, it is something that has already been built over time. As this continues, the awareness of what lies ahead becomes stronger because this is not just an experience, it is a transition towards something greater, something more serious, something that carries meaning beyond anything he had ever considered while living, and this is where the realization becomes undeniable. In that moment, he understands that life was never just about what he saw, what he gained, or what he experienced on the surface, it was always building towards something beyond it, something that does not end when life ends, but continues into what comes after. That realization changes everything because once a person experiences that level of clarity, they can no longer return to living as if it does not exist, they can no longer ignore what truly matters, because what they have seen is not something that fades, it is something that stays, something that reshapes how they understand every moment they are given afterward. This is where his story truly begins, not in the moment of separation but in what comes after it, because returning to life does not erase what he experienced, it carries it forward, transforming how he sees, how he thinks, and how he chooses to live, because once a person has seen beyond this world, they do not simply go back, they move forward differently. As he returned to his body, as breath slowly came back and the sounds around him began to form again, there was an immediate sense that something was different, not around him but within him, because even though his eyes opened and his heart continued to beat, the person who had just experienced that moment was no longer the same as the one who had lived before it. At first, everything appeared normal, the same faces, the same environment, the same life waiting for him to continue as if nothing had happened, yet the way he perceived it had changed completely because what once felt important now seemed small, and what once felt distant now felt urgent, and this shift was not something he chose, it was something that happened naturally as a result of what he had seen. He tried to understand it, to make sense of it in a way that could be explained, but the experience did not fit into simple words, It was not something that could be described fully, only something that could be felt, something that stayed present in his thoughts no matter what he was doing, like a quiet reminder that followed him everywhere. Days began to pass, but the feeling did not fade. Instead, it became clearer, more defined, shaping the way he thought, the way he reacted, and the way he saw even the smallest details of life. Because once a person experiences something beyond this world, their understanding of reality begins to expand in a way that cannot be reversed. He started to notice how quickly people move, how easily they become lost in routine, in worries, in temporary goals that feel urgent but do not last. And for the first time he saw it from a distance, as if he was no longer fully inside that cycle, but observing it with a different awareness. This did not separate him from people, but it changed how he connected with everything around him, because he no longer reacted the same way, no longer chased the same things, and no longer allowed temporary concerns to control his direction, because he now understood that everything leads somewhere, and that direction is not random. There was a constant awareness within him, a quiet understanding that life is not as permanent as it appears, that every moment is limited, and that what truly matters is not what is visible on the surface, but what is being built internally through choices and actions. Returning to his old habits became difficult, not because they were impossible but because they no longer felt meaningful. The distractions that once filled his time now felt empty, and the things he once ignored began to carry more weight, because clarity changes what a person values. People around him could not fully understand this change because from the outside nothing dramatic had happened. He looked the same, spoke the same, and continued his life, but internally everything had shifted, and that shift created a difference that could not be seen, only felt. This is where the challenge began, not a challenge of fear but of direction, because knowing something deeper does not automatically make life easy. It requires a person to decide how they will live with that knowledge, how they will act upon it, and how they will carry it forward. He began to reflect more often, thinking about his past choices, the time he spent on things that did not last, and the things he neglected that now seemed far more important, because when clarity appears, it not only shows what matters, it also reveals what was overlooked. That realization brought responsibility, because he understood that being given another chance was not random, it had meaning, it had purpose, and that purpose was something that had to be lived, not just understood. His actions began to change slowly, not all at once, but in small, consistent ways, because real change does not happen in a single moment. It is built over time, through repeated decisions that shape a different path. He started to move with intention, making choices more carefully, thinking beyond the moment, and considering where each action leads, because he now understood that what he does today is directly connected to what he will face later. This awareness gave him focus, because distractions no longer held the same power, and time no longer felt endless. It felt valuable, something that could not be wasted without consequence. Even with this clarity, there were moments of difficulty, because living with awareness requires effort, it requires consistency, and it requires choosing what is right even when it is not easy, and this is where many people turn away, but he could not, because what he experienced would not allow him to forget. The difference between who he was and who he had become continued to grow, because before he lived as if there would always be more time, but now he lived knowing that time is limited, and that every moment carries weight. One truth became clearer than everything else, that what he experienced was not meant to create fear, it was meant to create awareness, not to push him away from life, but to guide him within it, and this understanding brought a different kind of calm, not the calm of ignoring reality, but the calm of finally seeing it clearly. His life did not change overnight on the outside, but internally, everything had shifted, and that shift began to shape every decision, every action, and every direction he chose moving forward. Because once a person sees beyond this world, they do not return to life the same way, they return with a purpose they cannot ignore. As this awareness continued to grow within him, it began to shape not only how he saw life but how he moved through it, because understanding something deeply is not something that stays in thought, it spreads into actions, into decisions, into the smallest moments that once felt insignificant, and this is where the true transformation began to take form. He started to notice how easily a person can live without thinking about where they are going, how quickly days pass when they are filled with routine and distraction, and how simple it is to delay what truly matters by convincing yourself there will always be more time, because he had once lived that way, unaware of what he was building, unaware of where it was leading. Now that awareness did not leave him, it stayed present, a quiet reminder that followed him in every situation, guiding him even when he did not consciously think about it, because once a person experiences that level of clarity, it becomes part of them, something that does not fade with time. He began to see that life is not just a series of moments passing one after another, but a process of building, where every action contributes to something that will eventually be faced, whether it is noticed or not, and this understanding gave weight to everything he did, even the smallest choices. His priorities began to shift in a way that was natural, not forced, because what once seemed important no longer held the same value, and what once felt secondary now moved to the center of his focus, not because someone told him to change, but because he could no longer ignore what he had understood. Time became different in his eyes, not something to spend without thought, but something to use carefully, something that carries meaning in every moment, because he realized that time is not just passing, it is shaping something that continues beyond this life. With that realization came a sense of responsibility, not something external but something personal, because he understood that every action, every intention, every decision contributes to what is being built, and that nothing is without impact, even if it is not immediately visible. This awareness brought discipline into his life, not as something forced or heavy, but as something natural, because when a person truly understands what is at stake, they begin to act differently without needing constant reminders. The understanding itself becomes enough to guide them. There were moments when the weight of this awareness felt heavy, because seeing the truth also means recognizing what was missed, what was delayed, and what was ignored, and this is where regret begins to appear, not as something that destroys, but as something that teaches, something that pushes a person to change while there is still time. Instead of allowing that regret to hold him back, he used it, turning it into motivation, a reason to move forward differently, to correct what could still be corrected, and to focus on what truly matters before time runs out, because he now understood that time does not wait. His actions and his understanding began to align, what he knew and what he did started to match, and this is what gave him a sense of direction that was stable, something that did not change with circumstances, something that remained even when everything around him shifted. That alignment brought a different kind of peace, not the peace of comfort but the peace of clarity, because when a person knows where they are going and why, confusion begins to fade, replaced by a focus that is steady and intentional. He realized that what he experienced was not only about seeing something beyond this world, it was about understanding what that means for how he lives now, how he chooses, how he acts, and how he uses the time he has been given. Life was no longer separate from what comes after, it was directly connected to it, shaping it with every moment, and this realization changed how he saw even the simplest parts of his day, because nothing felt meaningless anymore. The difference between living with awareness and living without it became clear, because one moves with intention, while the other drifts without direction, and he had lived both, which is why he understood the importance of choosing consciously. One truth stood out above everything else, that what truly matters is not what is seen by others, not what is praised and not what is displayed, but what is real, what is sincere, and what remains when everything else is taken away. This understanding became the foundation of his life, because he was no longer building on what fades, he was building on what lasts, something that continues beyond this world, something that gives meaning to every action. The change within him was no longer temporary, it had become part of who he was, because once a person truly understands what lies beyond this life, they cannot return to living without awareness, they move forward differently, guided by something deeper than before. As his life continued in this new direction, the awareness he carried began to deepen even further, because understanding does not stay still, it either grows or fades, and in his case, it grew stronger with time, shaping not only what he did, but why he did it, and this is where the true test of that awareness began. He realized that knowing the truth is only the beginning, because knowledge without action does not change anything, and awareness without consistency slowly weakens, which is why what he experienced now required something from him, not a single decision but a continuous effort, a commitment that had to be renewed again and again. There were moments when the pull of his old life returned, familiar habits, comfortable distractions, the ease of doing what requires no effort, and this is where the struggle became real, not something external but something within, a choice between what is easy and what is meaningful. He understood that change is not built in one moment, it is built through repetition, through small decisions made consistently, because every time a person chooses what is right over what is easy, they strengthen that direction, and every time they ignore it, they weaken it. This is where discipline began to take shape, not as something forced, but as something necessary, because without discipline, awareness fades into intention without action, but with discipline, it becomes something real, something that shapes a person's life in a visible way. He began to see struggle differently, not as something to avoid, but as something that carries purpose, because struggle reveals what a person truly values, it shows whether they will remain consistent when it is difficult, or return to what is comfortable when it is easy. And through that struggle, his understanding became stronger, more stable, because it was no longer based only on what he felt in that moment, it was now supported by what he chose repeatedly in his daily life. He started to recognize that every moment is an opportunity, not in a general sense but in a very real way, because each moment gives a person the chance to act in alignment with what they know, to build something that remains, or to return to what fades. This awareness brought a sense of gratitude not only for what he had but for the chance itself, the chance to change, the chance to correct, the chance to move forward with clarity before it is too late, because he understood that not everyone is given that opportunity. That gratitude became a source of strength, because it shifted his focus from fear to purpose, from hesitation to action, and this is what allowed him to continue even when it was difficult, even when the path required effort. He also began to see people differently, not just by what they show on the surface, but by understanding that everyone is on a path, everyone is building something whether they are aware of it or not, and this gave him patience, a deeper sense of understanding, and a more meaningful way of interacting with others. His actions started to reflect his awareness, not perfectly but consistently, and this is what made the change real, because awareness that does not appear in actions remains incomplete, but when it shapes behavior, it becomes part of who a person is. He no longer needed constant reminders, because the understanding itself stayed with him, guiding his choices even in quiet moments, even when no one else was watching, and this is where true consistency is formed. Life no longer felt random to him, it felt directed, connected, shaped by every decision he made, and this gave him a sense of stability that he had never experienced before because he was no longer moving without direction. He understood now that what he experienced was not meant to remain a memory, it was meant to become a path, something that guides him forward, something that keeps him aligned even when life becomes uncertain. And this is where everything he had learned began to come together, because it was no longer separate ideas, it was one clear understanding that what he does now is directly shaping what comes next, and that connection is what gives every moment its importance. The deeper meaning of his experience became fully visible, not in what he saw during that moment, but in what it required from him afterward, because the value of that experience is not in remembering it, but in living according to it. This is what gave his life a new foundation, something that did not depend on circumstances, something that remained steady even when everything else changed, and that foundation became the direction he followed. Everything he experienced was leading to one realization, simple but powerful, that life is not just about passing time, it is about using it, about building something that continues beyond it, and that realization is what shaped everything that followed. As everything began to come together, as the awareness he carried, the changes he made, and the direction he chose all aligned into one clear understanding, the final realization settled within him, not as something distant, but as something immediate, something that shaped how he saw every moment of his life. He understood now that life is not simply something that passes, it is something that builds, something that forms a reality that a person will eventually face without distraction, without delay, and without the ability to change what has already been done, and this is what gives every moment its weight. Nothing in life is random, nothing is without meaning, and nothing simply disappears, because every action, every intention, every decision contributes to something that continues, something that becomes part of what comes next, whether a person is aware of it or not. This understanding gave him a clarity he had never known before, because he was no longer searching for meaning in things that fade, he was no longer building on what does not last, instead he focused on what remains, on what continues beyond the limits of this world. Time itself became different in his eyes, not something to spend carelessly, but something to use with awareness, something that carries value in every moment, because once time passes, it does not return, and what is done within it cannot be undone. With that came a sense of urgency, not rushed, not driven by fear alone, but steady and focused, a quiet awareness that every moment matters, that every decision carries weight, and that the opportunity to choose exists now, not later, because later is never guaranteed. His perspective reached a point where everything felt connected, where life was no longer separate from what comes after, but directly shaping it, building it, defining it through every action and every choice. This realization changed how he moved through life, because he was no longer guided by what felt easy, but by what carried meaning, no longer focused on what is seen, but on what is real, no longer distracted by what fades, but committed to what remains. He understood that what follows a person is not what they owned, not what they showed, and not what people remember about them, but what they built within themselves, what they carried in sincerity, and what they lived when no one else was watching. This brought him a sense of peace, not because life became perfect, but because it became aligned with something that does not change, something that remains constant even when everything else shifts, and this alignment replaced uncertainty with purpose. The message of what he experienced became clear not only for him but for anyone who reflects on it, because his story is not just about what happened, it is about what it reveals, about what it asks from every person who hears it. The truth is simple, even if it is not always easy to accept, that life is preparing for what comes next, shaping it with every moment, whether a person is aware of it or not, and this is what makes awareness so important. The final question is not about what he saw, but about what it means, because understanding without action does not change anything, and awareness without direction leads nowhere. So the question remains not about the afterlife itself, but about what you are doing now, what you are building, what you are choosing, and what you are becoming with the time you have been given. Because in the end, there is no return to change what has passed, no way to rewrite what has already been lived, only the reality that follows, shaped completely by what came before it. This is what makes every moment important, not because it feels important at the time, but because of what it leads to, because of what it builds, and because of what it becomes when everything else is left behind. Everything comes down to this realization, that what truly matters is not what is temporary, but what remains, not what is seen, but what is real, and not what is easy, but what is meaningful. And that is the truth he carried forward, not as a memory but as a direction, something that guided him in every step, something that shaped his life completely, and something that now stands as a reminder, that what you do today is what defines what comes next.